The recovery room at Northwestern Memorial smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and Corina Hale had been awake for exactly 11 minutes before she remembered where she was. The surgery had lasted 4 hours. A herniated disc, compressed by the impact when her car skidded off the bridge embankment on a frozen Tuesday in January. The pain that had crumpled her on the ice, unable to move her legs, was now a dull, medicated fog somewhere below her ribs. The monitors above her beeped in quiet rhythm. A nurse adjusted an IV line with practiced gentleness. And for those 11 minutes, the only thing Corina felt was something close to peace. Then the door opened. She knew before she saw him. The scent of Dexter Price's cologne reached her first. Bergamot and cedar, imported, the same bottle he'd been wearing since their second year of marriage. He stepped inside without rushing, without the tension of a man who'd nearly lost his wife the night before. And he wasn't carrying flowers or a coffee cup or even a jacket thrown hurriedly over a shirt the way people dress when they race to a hospital in the middle of the night. He was carrying a leather folder. "Dexter," she said, her voice rough from the intubation tube. "You're here." "I'm here," he repeated, but the way he said it was flat, confirmatory, like a man checking a box. He came to stand beside the bed without touching her, without looking at the monitors or the bandaging or the careful stillness of her body under the sheets. His eyes went to the rolling tray instead. He set the folder down on it, with a sound that was far too deliberate for a hospital room. "I need you to sign some documents," Dexter said. Corina blinked. The medication was still in her system, softening the edges of everything. "I'm sorry?" Before things get complicated, he opened the folder, flipped to a tabbed page, and set a pen beside it. "Your signature. Just 3 places. It won't take long." She stared at the pen, then at him. The bergamot smell felt wrong suddenly, sharp, chemical, like something meant to mask something else. "Dexter, I had surgery 8 hours ago." "I know." His tone didn't change, which is why now is better. "Before you're up and moving and talking to people who'll make this harder than it needs to be." The door opened behind him before she could answer. Harriet Oakes, the charge nurse who had been on this floor for 19 years, stepped in with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every kind of person that grief and desperation could produce. She took in the folder, the pen, and Dexter's posture in a single sweep. And something in her expression shifted from professional warmth to something older and more protective. "Sir," she said, "your wife just came out of spinal surgery. Her body is still processing anesthesia, and she's on a pain management drip. She cannot sign legal documents in this condition." She said it pleasantly, the way someone says a thing they've already decided is final. "We're going to need you to step out while I run her post-op checks." Dexter straightened, annoyed. "I'm her husband." "And this is her hospital room," Harriet said, "which means her recovery is my jurisdiction. You can wait in the family lounge." He gathered the folder with exaggerated calm, nodded once in Corina's direction without making eye contact, and walked out. The door closed behind him. Corina exhaled. She hadn't known she was holding her breath. "Don't sign anything," Harriet said quietly, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Whatever he brought in that folder, let someone else look at it first." Corina looked at the ceiling. The fog in her mind was clearing the way it does when fear is stronger than sedation. "My phone," she said. "He said he took it before the surgery, to keep it safe." Harriet nodded slowly. "We have a phone at the station. You can use it whenever you're ready." She was ready in 4 minutes. The number she called was one she had memorized as a teenager. Her father's attorney, Edna Fairchild, the woman who had sat at their kitchen table every tax season, and whom Corina had always thought of as part of the furniture of her childhood, permanent and slightly intimidating. When Edna picked up on the second ring, she didn't sound surprised. "Corina," she said, "I've been waiting. Are you safe?" The question landed strangely. "I'm in the hospital. I just had surgery." "I know. I also know that someone attempted to initiate a transfer of your trust assets this morning using your name." A pause. That triggered a flag on my end. I'm already in my car. Corina felt the last of the fog evaporate entirely. She lay very still while Harriet moved through the post-op checks, and she thought about the folder and the pen and the way Dexter had said, "Before you're up and moving and talking to people." She thought about the last 6 months. Dexter working late, taking calls near windows with his back turned, looking at her across the dinner table with an expression she had named at the time as stress. She named it differently now. Assessment. He'd been assessing her. A knock at the door. A young hospital security officer leaned in. "Mrs. Price? There's a woman in the lobby claiming to be your sister. She's asking to come up." Corinna had no sister. "Don't let her up," Harriet said before Corinna could process the question. 20 minutes later, Edna Fairchild walked in carrying a briefcase with brass clasps and the unhurried step of someone who had prepared for this specific day. She was 71, and she looked like a woman who had outlasted every emergency she'd ever encountered. She sat down beside the bed, opened the briefcase, and placed a folder on the tray, a different folder, older, bearing the Hale family seal embossed in the top left corner. "Your father," Edna said without preamble, "was a very careful man." Corinna's throat tightened. Charles Hale had died 4 years ago. She still wasn't entirely accustomed to the past tense. "He placed everything into an irrevocable trust 6 years before you married Dexter Price," Edna continued. "The Lakeview estate, the Hale Group portfolio, the land holdings in 3 counties, every asset, every account, every brick and acre, solely in your name. The trust has one beneficiary, and it is you, and nothing in it can be transferred, sold, or signed away without the consent of both the beneficiary and the trustee." She folded her hands. "Which is me. The papers Dexter brought this morning would have transferred your controlling interest in Hale Group to a shell company registered in his name. Had you signed them, the transfer would have been fraudulent. And because you're the beneficiary acting under duress, it would have constituted coercion of a trust document, a federal matter." The word federal sat in the air like smoke. "He's the CFO," Corinna said, more to herself than to Edna. "He's been running it for 3 years. "As an employee," Edna said gently, "on a salary paid by the trust, he has never owned a single share of anything your father built." She paused. "The trust also includes a duress clause. Any attempt to obtain your signature under circumstances of physical or cognitive impairment triggers a full forensic audit of all financial activity since the date of the marriage." Corinna looked at the door. "Let him come back in," she said. Edna raised an eyebrow. "Let him come in," Corinna said again. Dexter entered to find Edna sitting where he had expected a compliant, medicated wife. He stopped in the middle of the room and looked between them, and some calculation moved across his face like a shadow. "You called her," he said. "She already knew," Corinna said. Dexter looked at Edna. "Whatever she's told you, there's a context here you're missing. These documents are protective. They're designed to shield Corinna's assets in the event that—" "The documents you presented," Edna said calmly, "designate a shell company as the primary holder of the Hale Group's controlling interest. The shell company is registered to Dexter Allen Price. There is no protective purpose in that structure. There is only acquisition." She closed the page. "The audit began this morning." The color left Dexter's face by degrees. He turned to Corinna. His voice dropped to the soft private register he used when he wanted her to feel like she was the only person in the room who mattered. "I made decisions I shouldn't have. I know that. But I never wanted to hurt you. I just needed to protect what we built together." "You didn't build anything," she said quietly. She wasn't angry. She had passed through anger somewhere between the phone call and Edna sitting down. What she felt now was something cleaner and much more permanent. "You administered what my father built. There's a difference." He knew the difference. He planned for it. Dexter opened his mouth. The door opened again. 2 security officers stood at the threshold, and behind them, visible in the hallway, was a young woman with dark hair pulled back and shoes too expensive for someone who'd been standing in a hospital lobby for 2 hours. She was 25 or 26, and she had been crying, not recently but steadily, the kind of crying that leaves a person looking scraped clean. When she saw Dexter through the doorway, something in her face shifted from relief to fury in one breath. "They said you were in here." Tamsin Kelsey's voice came out already fraying at the edges. "I've been downstairs for 2 hours. You're not answering your phone." "Tamsin," Dexter's voice turned flat and clipped. "Not now." You told me by tonight it would be done." She stepped forward and the security officers let her, just barely. "You said she'd sign and we could." She stopped herself, looking at Corinna in the bed, looking at Edna, looking at the trust folder with the brass clasp. Her expression cracked completely. "You didn't tell her, did you? You didn't tell her anything." Corinna looked at Dexter. "Tell me what?" she asked. He said nothing. He was very still in the way that guilty men go still when the walls close in simultaneously from every direction. Tamsin wrapped her arms around herself, and when she spoke again it was almost without inflection. The voice of someone who had rehearsed the words so many times they'd gone smooth. "I'm pregnant," she said. "He's known for 6 weeks." The monitors beeped softly. Somewhere down the hall a phone rang twice and stopped. Corinna looked at her husband, at the man who had sat across from her at their dining room table last Tuesday, and said he was tired and needed an early night. At the man whose cologne she had always associated with safety, at the man who had held her hand in the ER while she was still shaking and unable to feel her legs. And she looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at something you are committing to memory before letting it go. "I want him removed from this room," she said to the security officers, "and I want it documented." Dexter took one step toward her. "Corinna?" "Now, please," she said. He was escorted out. Tamsin was taken downstairs to speak with hospital administration. Edna stayed. Harriet brought tea from the nurse's station and set it on the tray without comment. For a long while the room was quiet except for the monitors and the low hum of the heating system, and Corinna lay against the pillow and let herself feel the full weight of it. Not to collapse under it, but to understand its dimensions. Her father had known, not about Dexter specifically, perhaps, but he had known about the kind of person who might one day stand beside his daughter and mistake her kindness for passivity and her grace for an absence of power. He had built a wall around her long before she knew she needed one, and he had done it quietly and without ceremony, the way he did everything that mattered. On the 3rd day, Corinna was discharged. Quentin Moss, an attorney from Edna's firm who managed trust administration, arrived that morning carrying a slim envelope sealed with her father's initials. He had held it for 4 years per Charles Hale's explicit instructions, to be delivered when the trustee determined a qualifying event had occurred. Edna had made that determination at 7 in the morning. Corinna opened the envelope in her hospital room, with Edna sitting beside her and Harriet standing near the window, neither of them pretending not to watch. The letter was handwritten. Her father's handwriting had always looked like something from another century, careful, deliberate, built to last. "My Corinna." It began without preamble, the way he'd always spoken to her. "If you are reading this, then something tested you that I always feared would come. I am sorry I could not be there to stand beside you. I hope instead that what I left you is sufficient." She read those lines twice before she could continue. "The Hale Group belongs to you. The estate belongs to you. Not because you inherited them, but because you are the only person I have ever trusted to understand what they're for. They are not trophies. They are not leverage. They are the accumulated belief of 2 generations of people who decided that what they built should outlast them and serve the ones they loved. Do not be gentle with anyone who mistakes your love for weakness. You were never weak. I just hope you know it now. Your father, Charles." She folded the letter along its original crease and held it against her sternum the way you hold something you don't want to put down. The Hale Group's board had already convened. Dexter's access to all company systems had been suspended pending the forensic audit, which had in its first 24 hours flagged 11 transactions he'd routed through accounts she had never been shown. Quentin Moss had already been in contact with federal financial regulators. The legal machinery was moving with the slow, irreversible certainty of something that had always been ready to run. The drive home took 40 minutes through light traffic. When the car turned onto the long driveway of the Lakeview estate, Corinna pressed her hand flat against the cold window and watched the house appear through the winter bare trees. 3 stories of pale stone, the same windows she had pressed her face against as a child. The same iron gate her father had always left unlocked, because he said, locks kept people out, but open gates kept them honest. Dexter was standing at the gate. He looked diminished outside the context of a boardroom. He was still well-dressed. He was always well-dressed. But standing in a January wind on a driveway that had never belonged to him, he looked like exactly what he was. A man who had spent 4 years milishing someone else's legacy and calling it his own. "I just want to talk," he said when the car stopped, and Corinna stepped out with careful movements, one hand on the doorframe. She stood in the cold and looked at him. "You had 4 years to talk," she said. "You chose to bring a folder instead." I panicked. His jaw worked. The audit reports were going to surface eventually, and I thought if I could restructure before I knew, she said. He looked at the ground. "We had a life here," he said finally, and she could hear the last effort in it, the final calculation dressed up as sentiment. "You had access here," Corinna said. "There's a difference. My father understood the difference. I understand it now." A car pulled up behind her, a plain sedan, unremarkable. A man in a dark jacket stepped out and walked toward Dexter with an envelope and a calm, practiced efficiency. "Mr. Price," the man said, "I have a temporary restraining order and a notice of investigation from the Office of the U.S. Attorney. You're required to surrender your passport and appear for questioning on Friday." Dexter took the envelope. He held it without opening it, the way people hold things they already know are final. He looked at Corinna one last time. She didn't look away, didn't soften, didn't offer him anything. Not absolution, not anger, not even the dignity of her undivided attention. She simply stood on the gravel driveway of her father's house, which was her house, and waited. Dexter walked to his car. The engine started. The gate swung open and he drove through it, and when it closed again behind him, the sound was small and definitive, like a period at the end of a sentence that had gone on far too long. Corinna stood in the quiet for a moment. The cold air was clean and sharp, and somewhere in the bare trees there were birds. She walked to the front door, took out the key that had been on her keychain since she was 17, and let herself in. The foyer smelled like the same house it had always been. Old wood, the faint trace of cedar her father had stacked every autumn, warmth from radiators that still ran on the original system, because Charles Hale had believed, firmly, in things built to last. She stood in the entry hall, with his letter still in her coat pocket, and let the silence of the house settle around her. She didn't know yet what rebuilding would look like. She didn't know which rooms she'd change and which she'd keep exactly as they were. She didn't know how long the audit would take or what it would ultimately ask of her. She didn't know who she would become on the other side of the year ahead. But she knew whose name was on the deed. She knew whose initials were pressed into the wax on that sealed envelope, and whose handwriting had reached across 4 years of silence to tell her, without equivocation, that she had never been as alone or as powerless as the man with the leather folder had needed her to believe. She closed the front door behind her. Outside, the January wind moved through the iron gate. The driveway was empty, the estate was still, and everything from that moment forward was hers to decide.